Hi, my name is Ava, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet one in the family, the one who shows up to every holiday, brings a dish, sits at the end of the table, and somehow still becomes invisible. But that Thanksgiving, something shifted. When my sister lifted her wine glass and, with that polished CEO smile of hers, said, "So, still playing your little online entrepreneur game?" My parents laughed. My dad even added, "Honey, maybe one day you'll do real work like your sister." Ah, I remember the heat rising in my chest. I remember my fork stopping midair. I remember wanting to disappear, but instead I just nodded and said, "I understand." That moment didn't break me, it woke me up. Before I take you deeper into what happened after that dinner, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? It would mean a lot to know I'm not reliving this moment alone. Growing up in my family felt like living in a house where all the windows faced only one direction, toward Linda. She was the sun everyone orbited, the one whose achievements lit up every room. From the moment she stepped into her first debate tournament, winning with the smile of someone born to be applauded, it was clear she wasn't just the favorite. She was the entire blueprint of what success looked like in my parents' eyes. Harvard MBA, national leadership conferences, magazine features with titles like "The FinTech Visionary to Watch." She didn't just build a network, she became one. People gravitated toward her, charmed by her confidence, her eloquence, her curated brand of ambition. And my parents, predictably, carved out an altar for her made of pride, expectations, and years of subtle comparison. Meanwhile, I grew up in the leftover space, quiet, observant, more drawn to dismantling electronics than winning trophies. While Linda excelled at commanding rooms, I preferred the hum of servers, the quiet logic of algorithms. The way code never judged you for being introverted or awkward or more comfortable behind a screen than in front of an audience. But in a family like mine, interests like that were considered quirks, not talents. My mother used to say it gently, as though it were a compliment. "She's our little thinker." Not a leader like Linda, but smart in her own way. My father was less diplomatic. "Computers are fine as hobbies," he'd say. "But real success means leading people, CEOs, founders, doers, not coders." Even teachers reinforced the same narrative. I remember one afternoon in 8th grade when my computer science teacher called my parents in for a meeting. I sat quietly as he said, "She's bright, exceptionally so. But she doesn't have the personality of a CEO. She's not assertive enough. She'll do well in technical roles, but leadership? Probably not." My father nodded like he'd expected it all along. Linda, on the other hand, had already been voted student council president twice by then. The comparison was effortless, constant, and exhausting. For years, I absorbed it all without protest. Maybe because part of me believed them. Maybe because silence was easier than arguing against an entire ecosystem built to elevate someone else. But silence doesn't mean nothing grows. Sometimes silence is where the most dangerous seeds take root. While Linda climbed every stage and spotlight available, I started building something far less glamorous but far more powerful. What began as a small side project during college, an algorithm designed to detect early-stage security breaches, slowly evolved into a full cybersecurity platform. I spent 7 years refining it, line by line, patch by patch, always in the quiet hours after day jobs, internships, or contract work. No one asked what I was building. No one cared enough to. They assumed it was another tech hobby, the kind they always smiled at politely before steering conversations back to Linda's latest accomplishment. But while my parents were busy attending Linda's pitch competitions and gala dinners, my platform grew. Businesses discovered it, then adopted it. 10 clients became 50. 50 turned into 100. Then 300. Each one paid licensing fees not because of my personality, but because the product worked. They didn't care if I was quiet or introverted or unfit for a stage. They cared that the system detected breaches hours before other tools even raised flags. They cared that it protected them. I said nothing. About the users. About the revenue. About the growing team of contractors working under strict NDAs. About the acquisition interest I turned down twice. Silence became the shield that protected my work from my family's scrutiny and the weapon that would one day redefine everything. But the part no one would ever have expected, the part they absolutely never saw coming, was how deeply that silence extended. Because while they were busy celebrating Linda's public victories, I made a private move that shifted the foundation of her entire empire. 3 years ago, a strategic investment firm approached me, asking to license my AI detection engine for their portfolio companies. The deal was lucrative, but something else in the contract caught my attention. An invitation to become a limited partner in their high-growth fund. Quietly, anonymously. No publicity. No announcements. Just capital, influence, and long-term stakes in the companies they supported. One of those companies, ironically or poetically, depending on how you see it, was Linda's startup. I didn't choose it. I didn't force anything. The fund invested in her because of her traction and PR momentum. I merely existed quietly in the background, acquiring 38% of her company through the fund over time, still anonymous, still invisible, still the non-leader my family believed I was. I never interfered, never voted, never revealed myself. I let her shine, let her run her company the way she wanted, let her family bask in the glow of their golden child. All while my name sat quietly in the fund's deepest files, shielded behind confidentiality clauses Linda never even bothered to read. They thought I wasn't part of the real world. They thought I had no place in business. They thought my work was small, insignificant, amateurish. They thought wrong. Because in the eyes of corporate law, Linda may have been the face of her company, but I was one of its largest unseen hands. And as I left Thanksgiving dinner that night, the cold November air hitting my face like a reset button, I realized something important, something that made everything suddenly clear. For years, they had underestimated me. But that night, I finally understood the price of their mistake. A mistake I was done letting slide. 2 days after Thanksgiving, when the house had finally quieted and everyone had returned to their curated routines, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by monitors casting a soft blue glow across the room. December rain tapped against the windows like an impatient guest. My mind kept drifting back to Linda's voice, her laugh, her dismissive tone, the way my parents had nodded along as if her words were gospel. But instead of feeling angry, I felt sharpened. As though the universe itself had flipped a switch inside me. I wasn't planning revenge, not then. But I could feel something shifting toward inevitability. That morning, I opened my inbox expecting client reports, server alerts, and routine platform diagnostics. Instead, I saw an email from the investment firm, the one I was quietly partnered with, the one that held my anonymous leverage inside Linda's company. The subject line was unusually stark. Special review, confidential portfolio note for LP eyes only. I hesitated. The fund rarely contacted me directly. Information usually flowed through quarterly digests or scheduled review calls. Direct communication meant something was wrong, seriously wrong. I clicked the email. Inside was a single encrypted attachment. It required multi-factor authentication plus a rotating passphrase known only to LPs. My stomach tightened slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. The kind that appears when puzzle pieces you never expected to connect start quietly snapping into place. The report opened with a heavy header. Preliminary Risk Assessment, Finlink Innovations, Linda's company. Below it, several pages of dense text, charts, and internal audit logs. But the first highlighted section said everything. Undisclosed breach detected. Financial data compromised. Evidence suggests internal negligence. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. My sister, the loudly proclaimed prodigy, the family's walking success story, was hiding something massive. The report detailed how a batch of encrypted financial data had been improperly stored on a secondary server, one not authorized for sensitive information. A vulnerability had been exploited. Data had leaked. Not publicly, not yet, but the forensic analysis traced the breach back several months. I scrolled further, absorbing every word, feeling my heartbeat settle instead of spike. This was the part that froze me. Multiple attempts detected to disguise or delay exposure. Potential manipulation of audit logs. CEO involvement suspected. Linda. Involved in an attempted cover-up. Not out of malice, no, Linda wasn't malicious. She was terrified of being anything less than flawless, terrified of losing her pedestal, terrified of disappointing the parents who adored her and the investors who expected a miracle every quarter. And fear, especially the fear of losing a carefully crafted image, can drive people into very dark decisions. The next section was worse. If breach becomes public. High probability of regulatory investigation. Federal penalties. Criminal liability for executive officers. I sat still for a long moment, letting the implications root themselves in my mind. Linda wasn't just irresponsible. She wasn't just arrogant. She was in danger. And she was hiding it. Hiding it well enough that even my parents still believed her company was unstoppable. They bragged about her at church, at alumni dinners, at neighborhood gatherings. They had no idea their golden child was standing on a minefield, smiling for photos while the ground beneath her cracked. I scrolled to the final page. A note, written for LPs only, discreet and cold. We advise immediate monitoring. Executive behavior suggests ongoing concealment. Confidence in leadership integrity. Low. I closed the report and stared at my reflection faintly visible in the dark monitor. The irony didn't escape me. Linda had mocked me only days earlier for building online toys, yet her entire empire, her reputation, her future was now entangled with a digital ghost she couldn't outrun. A ghost that happened to be me. I stood up, pacing slowly around the room. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Somewhere deep inside, a question surfaced, not emotional, not vengeful, but precise, calculated. Why didn't she disclose it? Why wasn't she fixing it? What was she hiding from everyone, including me? I returned to the desk and reopened the logs, this time digging into the forensic timeline. And there it was, the pattern. Linda had known about the breach months ago. She'd been warned by her CTO. She'd seen the flagged alerts. Instead of addressing it, she had rerouted internal communications, delayed audits, approved misleading summaries, and authorized a series of urgent budget reallocations that funneled money into patchwork fixes meant to buy time rather than solve the root problem. Her entire company had become a glittering facade built over a rotting foundation. And the most dangerous part, she believed she could outrun the truth. I could almost hear her voice in the back of my mind. Leadership isn't about technical details, it's about vision, presentation, control. Except this wasn't about leadership. This was about ethics. About legality. About a federal offense that could end a career. Hours passed without me noticing. I read every page twice, then a third time. The pieces aligned with terrifying clarity. Linda was hiding the kind of violation that could take down not only her company, but everyone associated with it, including the fund I was tied to. And if the fund suffered, my platform, my clients, my entire ecosystem would be indirectly exposed. Linda's recklessness wasn't just her problem anymore. It was mine. And the deeper I read, the clearer it became. Linda hadn't just made a mistake. She had built an empire on borrowed time. And time, I knew, never stays borrowed for long. As I closed the laptop, the room felt colder than before. My breath fogged slightly in the dim light, as though even the air knew the stakes had shifted. If Thanksgiving was the moment I woke up, then this was the moment the ground truly began to shake. I wasn't planning to intervene. But I also wasn't going to let her drag me or everything I'd built into the fire she was trying so desperately to hide. And for the first time, I understood something with perfect clarity. Linda wasn't the unstoppable force she pretended to be. She was a countdown. And the clock had already started. I didn't sleep much after reading the report. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a dull gray fog, the kind that made everything feel suspended, held in place just long enough for a single decision to change its shape. I spent hours debating whether I should warn Linda at all. Part of me knew she wouldn't listen. Linda never listened to information that didn't flatter her. But another part of me, the part still tethered to the remnants of familial responsibility, felt obligated to say something before her private crisis became a public disaster. So, I messaged her. A short, neutral line. "Can we talk? It's important." She replied instantly. "Meet at my office. 3 p.m. No warmth, no curiosity. Just command. Her office sleek, glass-walled, buzzing with the curated chaos of an emerging tech powerhouse was exactly what you'd expect from a rising Silicon Valley darling transplanted back into the city that raised us. When I arrived, her assistant ushered me in as though I were a vendor, not her sibling. Linda stood by the window with her arms crossed, the skyline reflecting off the glass behind her like an expensive backdrop chosen to complement her ambition. "What's this about?" she asked without turning around. I stepped further into the room, suddenly aware of how foreign her world felt compared to mine. "I wanted to talk to you about your systems," I said evenly. "Your data infrastructure. There's something you need to know." That got her attention. She turned, eyebrows raised, expression caught somewhere between annoyance and amusement. "My systems?" Her voice dripped with condescension. "Okay, go ahead." I kept my voice steady. "Your secondary storage servers have vulnerabilities. There was a breach. It hasn't gone public yet, but the fund is investigating. You need to address it immediately. If regulators find out, you could be facing—" She laughed. A full, dismissive, unbothered laugh that echoed through the room and made my jaw clench. "Oh my God, are you serious?" She stepped closer, eyes scanning me like she was evaluating a malfunctioning device. "You read some technical logs and suddenly think you understand the complexities of running a company?" I let the silence stretch, refusing to rise to the bait. She continued, shaking her head slowly. "This is why you'll never understand business. Startup leadership isn't about theoretical risks or whatever coding emergency you think you found. It's about vision, control, positioning." She moved behind her desk, tapping her fingers against the edge with growing impatience. "And honestly, this feels like jealousy. You've always been sensitive. Maybe seeing my company grow makes you want to insert yourself into it, but this isn't about jealousy," I cut in quietly. "This is about legal exposure. If this comes out the wrong way—" "Legal exposure?" she repeated mockingly. "You think I don't know what's going on inside my own company? You think you found something my entire team missed? I have a CTO, a compliance officer, a legal department. I don't need—" She gestured toward me dismissively. "Whatever it is you're trying to be." Her words landed with the familiar sting of déjà vu. The same pattern as always. Linda minimized, ridiculed, reframed. She loved the sound of her own certainty. She loved it more than truth. "You're hiding something," I said softly, not accusingly, simply stating a fact. She froze for half a second, barely noticeable unless you'd known her your entire life. Her eyes tightened, just a fraction. Then her expression reset into practiced superiority. "What I'm doing is protecting my company from unnecessary noise," she said coolly. "Everything is under control." No, it wasn't. She knew it. And the flicker in her expression, too quick for anyone but a sibling to spot, confirmed it. She was gambling. She believed she could outrun accountability, delay consequences, manage optics. She believed her reputation mattered more than reality. "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight she didn't anticipate. "I'm not your investor. I'm not your board. I'm your sister. I'm telling you because you have a window to fix this quietly before it becomes—" "Oh, please," she snapped. "You're not telling me this out of concern. Don't pretend to understand how my world works." She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You build little tools and call them products. You think managing data is the same as managing an entire company? I'm sorry, but leadership is not your strength. It never has been." Her words didn't hurt the way she intended. Not anymore. They revealed something else entirely. She wasn't confident. She was cornered. Arrogance was her armor. Misdirection, her shield. And fear, undeniable, creeping fear, was beginning to stain the edges. I exhaled slowly. "I hope your leadership keeps you safe, Linda," I said quietly. "Because the next time this surfaces, it won't be in a private report." She folded her arms, chin raised in challenge. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said, turning toward the door. "That's reality." The room felt colder as I walked out, not because her world rejected me, but because I finally understood something I'd spent years denying. Linda wasn't hiding the breach out of ignorance. She was hiding it out of pride. Pride that would drag her down before she ever admitted she needed help. I didn't look back. She didn't call after me. We both understood the conversation had reached its dead end. But as I stepped outside into the December air, I knew the real ending hadn't happened yet. It would come later. At Christmas. In front of everyone. When pride, denial, and the truth finally collided. Christmas at my aunt's house was never subtle. She hosted holiday gatherings like political rallies, lights dripping from every surface, a towering tree decorated with ornaments that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a guest list so bloated it felt like half the city's upper-middle-class population spilled into her living room. That year, nearly 60 people attended, all relatives from various branches of the family tree, some I greeted every year and others I wouldn't recognize even with a name tag. Laughter echoed through the halls, and the clinking of champagne glasses punctuated every conversation. It was a scene designed for celebration, yet beneath the bright ornaments and polished silver lay an undercurrent I could feel the moment I walked in. I stepped through the doorway and immediately felt dozens of eyes flick toward me in that polite but assessing way relatives do. Some smiled. Most nodded distantly. But it didn't take long for the questions to begin. They always came from the same type of cousin or uncle, the ones who measured worth by job titles and investment portfolios and the volume of applause someone received during speeches. "So," Uncle Robert said, swirling his bourbon as though contemplating a stock chart, "you still doing that little online business?" A cousin chimed in before I could answer, "Yeah, the tiny tech project thing, right?" He said it with a playful tone, but the smirk on his lips gave him away. I smiled politely. Something like that. It was never worth explaining. They weren't asking, they were judging. And they were waiting for an explanation that fit their mental hierarchy of the family, one where Linda sat comfortably on top. Speak of the devil. Linda entered the room like a storm wrapped in silk, sleek red dress, effortless confidence, the polished poise of someone accustomed to being the focal point. Conversation around her softened into admiration. People leaned in, eager to absorb her aura. My parents followed behind her, faces glowing with pride, as though escorting royalty. My aunt clinked a spoon against her champagne glass dramatically, causing the chatter to hush. "Everyone," she announced, "a round of applause for our family's pride and joy, Linda." Recently featured in Forbes, leading one of the fastest-growing fintech startups in the country. The room erupted with cheers. Compliments showered her from every corner like confetti. Inspiring. A true visionary. Harvard really does produce the best. My parents beamed as if these accolades were directed at them. I clapped politely, the same way you clap when your hands know they're supposed to move even if your heart doesn't feel much of anything. Then, inevitably, Linda's gaze landed on me. She excused herself from a small crowd of admirers and approached, her heels tapping a calculated rhythm across the polished floor. People nearby turned their attention, sensing something entertaining about to happen. Families are predictable like that. "Well," she said loudly, ensuring her voice carried through the immediate circle. "Look who finally made it." Several relatives leaned in subtly, drawn by the tension like moths to a flame. So tell us, Linda continued, flipping her hair with theatrical ease. Are you still? What was it again? She pretended to think. Playing entrepreneur? A few chuckles spilled from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh dear," as though watching a sitcom unfold. It's adorable, really, Linda added, voice amplified just enough for the cluster of guests behind her to catch every word. She plays entrepreneur. It's cute, but it's not real business. Not like what we do. She gestured vaguely to herself and the imaginary empire she believed only she could inhabit. Laughter broke like a wave. Light, dismissive, patronizing. My parents nodded, embarrassed on my behalf. My mother muttered something about, "Not everyone can be a leader." My father patted Linda on the shoulder like she'd just delivered a helpful public service announcement. And there I stood, in the center of their spotlight, surrounded by people who had never once asked what I built or how far it had reached. They didn't want answers, they wanted hierarchy. Linda smiled at me, satisfied, as though expecting me to shrink the way I always used to, quietly, politely, invisibly. But this time felt different. The silence inside me didn't feel shrinking. It felt sharpening. I straightened my posture just slightly. Enough for Linda to register the shift. Enough for the laughter to die down a fraction too early, leaving the air strangely expectant. "You're right," I said casually, my voice calm and clear. "I'm not doing a small business anymore." "Die?" Linda blinked, confused. "What?" "And I won't be silent about it," I continued, letting the words settle like a stone dropping into still water. For a split second, the room paused. Conversations at nearby tables softened, as though sensing a fault line forming beneath us. A few people looked between me and Linda with growing curiosity. My sister raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at her lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" I let a cool, measured smile form. "Just that things are changing, faster than you think." A few relatives exchanged glances. My parents frowned, unsettled but unsure why. Linda stared at me, irritation flickering across her face, masked quickly by condescension. "You're being dramatic," she scoffed. "You always were." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you've just never noticed when someone else was preparing for something bigger." Her smile faltered again, but only slightly. The room didn't understand my words. Not yet. How could they? They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know what Linda was hiding. They had no idea that while they celebrated her success, a countdown had already started beneath her company's polished facade. They didn't know that my silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Preparation. And they certainly didn't know that Linda's humiliation would soon be the least of her concerns. I held her gaze for a moment longer, long enough for her to sense a shift she couldn't name, and then I turned away calmly, leaving her surrounded by people who suddenly didn't know whether to laugh again or stay quiet. No one understood what was coming. Not yet. But they would. The night of the Christmas party stayed with me long after the last champagne glass was emptied and the final compliment about Linda's brilliance echoed out of the front door. I drove home through quiet streets strung with lights, the city glowing in that warm, festive way that hides its coldest truths. Inside my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. Not oppressive, just waiting. Like a room that knew something I hadn't said out loud yet. I changed into comfortable clothes, tied my hair back, and powered on my monitors. The blue light washed across the room, revealing the familiar constellation of files, systems, dashboards, and encrypted vaults of data I lived with more intimately than any person in my life. Christmas or not, truth didn't take breaks. And neither did breaches. I opened the secure LP portal to the fund first. My fingers paused on the keyboard for just a moment, not out of hesitation, but because I knew instinctively that whatever I found tonight would change everything. Thanksgiving was humiliation. Christmas was escalation. But this would be the breaking point. The dashboard loaded slowly, pulling from multiple encrypted repositories. Audit logs. Compliance flags. Internal review notes. My eyes scanned them quickly, methodically, the way someone reads a familiar language. New alerts popped up, ones that weren't there before. Incident report, level red, unauthorized executive authorization detected. I clicked it. Lines of data filled the screen. Contract IDs. Signatures. Hidden timestamps. The kind of digital residue people leave behind when they think deleting a file means erasing a secret. Linda had signed contracts, substantial ones, with a third-party consulting firm that didn't exist 6 months ago. The amounts were suspiciously round, spread out across multiple departments to avoid detection. The internal notes from the fund's investigators were blunt. These transactions appear intended to mask the financial impact of the breach event. Evidence suggests intentional misrepresentation of system integrity. CEO, authorizations circumvented standard review process. My chest tightened. This was worse than the first report. Much worse. I opened the cross-linked forensic analysis from the fund. Halfway down the document, highlighted in red, was a line that made my stomach drop. Based on preliminary findings, this constitutes a federal-level data security violation. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This wasn't a risk. This wasn't a mistake. This was a crime. I leaned back slowly, pinching the bridge of my nose, feeling the familiar chill of understanding settle through me. Linda hadn't just ignored a breach. She had actively tampered with evidence, paid off a shell company to falsify patch reports, and buried the financial impact through internal accounting tricks. It was deliberate, calculated, desperate. I clicked into the financial side next, accessing the fund's quarterly reconciliations. At first glance, everything looked normal, slick, polished, glossy numbers that anyone less meticulous would have trusted. But there, tucked between inflated growth projections and embellished KPI charts, was the truth. A hidden $20 million liability. Buried beneath R&D investments. Shifted between departments. Disguised as future acquisition costs. 20 million. My breath stilled for a moment. This wasn't something you fix with a pitch deck or an optimistic board meeting. It wasn't something you cover with charisma or leadership or reputation. It was the kind of debt that sinks companies. The kind that ruins careers. The kind that lands CEOs in courtrooms answering questions with trembling hands. Linda had risked everything, not for the company, but for her ego. I clicked into another folder. Performance data charts. They were pristine. Too pristine. The kind of perfection that software never produces naturally. AI forecasting tools don't make curves that smooth. Real numbers have edges, dips, noise, but these had none. Someone had scrubbed them clean. Irana checksum. Mismatch. Then another. Mismatch again. The numbers were fabricated. Linda hadn't just massaged the truth, she'd rewritten it. Employee productivity. Monthly active users. Financial throughput. Conversion rates. All of it artificially inflated. The kind of falsification that, if uncovered, could shut the entire company down. I rubbed my hands together slowly, not to warm them, but to steady myself. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, absorbing the magnitude of it all. My sister, the prodigy, the Harvard-shaped masterpiece my parents paraded around, was committing fraud to protect her image. She wasn't trying to save her company. She was trying to save face. The difference mattered. Because saving a company meant admitting mistakes, making disclosures, calling auditors, notifying regulators, and bracing for public fallout. Saving face meant burying everything until it exploded. I opened the compliance thread next. A chilling statement appeared almost immediately. Our internal recommendation. CEO removal or suspension pending investigation. That did it. The final click in a sequence of revelations I had tried so hard to ignore. This wasn't family drama anymore. This wasn't a sibling rivalry. This wasn't one sister mocking another at a holiday dinner. This was a legal time bomb. Federal. Criminal. Unavoidable. And Linda was standing on it, smiling, posing for photos, bragging to relatives while the fuse burned quietly beneath her heels. I closed my eyes briefly, exhaling slowly into the dark room. When I opened them again, I knew exactly what I had to do. Not out of revenge, not out of pettiness, not even out of the humiliation she'd thrown at me over the years. But because the moment this became public, and the blast radius would reach everything connected to the company, including the fund, and by extension, me, my platform, my clients, my entire ecosystem, Linda wasn't just endangering herself anymore. She was endangering everyone. I straightened in my chair, fingers hovering above the keyboard. If Linda insisted on living inside a fantasy built on lies, then someone else would have to deal with reality. Someone with more at stake than she ever understood. Someone she had underestimated her entire life. And Christmas had already taken enough from me. It was time to pick up the match Linda thought she'd buried, and decide whether to let the fuse burn or light the whole thing myself. By the time dawn crept into my apartment, the decision was already made. Not in a dramatic, angry burst, but slowly, quietly, the way ice forms on a lake, one thin sheet, then another, until the whole surface becomes solid and unbreakable. I stared at the last line of the compliance report again, the warning that Linda's leadership posed a material risk to the fund, and something inside me finally clicked into place. For years, my silence had been a shield. But now, silence had become a liability. I opened my inbox, cracked my knuckles, and clicked compose. The screen felt impossibly bright in the dim room, waiting, expecting, almost daring me to type the words that would change the trajectory of everything: Linda's company, the fund's stability, my family's illusions, even my own future. In the subject line, I wrote, "Immediate directive, execute withdrawal." Then, in the message body, just 4 words: simple, clinical, devastating. Pull the $100 million. No explanation. No justification. No emotion. Because at that level, power rarely needs punctuation. I read it once, twice, then pressed send. The email left my outbox in less than a second. The consequences began unfolding almost immediately. Within minutes, my secure notifications lit up. Emergency capital extraction protocol initiated. Liquidity reallocation confirmed. Voting power review underway. Then the one line I had been waiting for. Special Clause 9.2 activated. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of those words settle over me like falling ash. Clause 9.2. The sleeper clause. The one Linda had never bothered to learn, hidden in a sea of legal jargon she skipped in favor of her PR meetings and branding campaigns. The clause that said, if any capital partner withdraws 30% or more, all executive voting control is suspended for 48 hours pending emergency review. 48 hours. 48 hours where Linda would not be CEO in any meaningful sense. 48 hours where the board could step in. 48 hours where my fund could name a temporary controller. Linda thought she understood business. She thought she understood power. She thought leadership was about voice, charisma, dominance. But she never understood structure. She never understood contracts. She never understood leverage. And leverage was the only language that mattered now. The system continued updating in real time. A flurry of alerts, board pings, compliance escalations, and investor flags flowed across my screens like a digital storm. Somewhere in that corporate tower she loved to parade through, alarms were already ringing, quiet ones at first, the kind that only senior staff could see. But soon, they would grow louder. Everyone would feel it. I stood up, crossed the room, and poured a glass of cold water. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. It wasn't revenge, I felt it was clarity. Ruthless, necessary clarity. For years, people mistook my quiet for passivity. They thought my stillness meant weakness. But they never understood that stillness is what happens when someone is calculating, planning, observing, preparing. Clause 9.2 had been the reason I never challenged Linda publicly. The reason I never engaged in the petty battles she tried to pull me into. The reason I kept my head down while the fund accumulated shares on my behalf. I wasn't waiting to impress anyone. I wasn't waiting for her approval. I was waiting for the conditions to be right. And now they were. My phone buzzed. A message from the senior capital officer at the fund appeared on my screen. Directive received. Initiating full withdrawal. Confirmation call at 9 a.m. Then another. Given your LP status, you will be part of the emergency oversight panel. 1. Then, the one that would unravel everything Linda believed she controlled. Suspension of CEO voting authority effective immediately. I stared at the notification for a long moment. If Linda could see it, she would finally understand the cost of all her dismissiveness. The price of every insult. The weight of every time she laughed at me across a dinner table. But she wouldn't see it yet. Not now. That moment would come later, and I would meet her eyes when it did. I sat down again and reopened the fund's internal communication log. Board members were already requesting documents, scheduling emergency meetings, drafting compliance reviews. Her CTO had been notified. So had the CFO. The legal team was mobilizing. Overnight, her world was shifting and she had no idea who had pressed the first domino. I closed the dashboard, took a breath, and reopened the email thread between the fund managers. There, under the final procedural update, I saw a line highlighted in bold red. Pending controlling holder nomination. Every LP knew what that meant. When executive authority is suspended, the fund must appoint a temporary controlling holder. Someone with enough stake. Enough influence. Enough proximity to the crisis. Someone the fund trusts. Someone who understands the technology, the risk, the structure, the problem. Someone who knew the breach wasn't just an accident but a pattern. Someone who had been watching quietly for years. Someone exactly like me. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle fully. This wasn't the beginning of a crisis. This was the beginning of a transfer of power. Linda didn't know it yet. My parents didn't know it yet. The family who laughed didn't know it yet. But the company she had built her identity around was slipping out of her hands, steered not by scandal, or auditors, or regulators, but by the sibling she had spent her entire life ignoring. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The sun was rising now, pale and cold, casting soft light over the street below. People were waking up. Cars were starting. Life continued, unaware that, somewhere in a glass tower across the city, an empire was beginning to crumble, not because I attacked it, but because Linda built it on secrets. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the fund. Controlling, holder discussion will begin shortly. You will be contacted. I exhaled slowly. Linda always believed she was the only one in the family destined for greatness. But she never understood the quiet child. She never understood the invisible one. She never understood me. And now, for the first time in our lives, she was about to learn exactly who she had underestimated. Exactly what my silence had protected. Exactly what power looks like when it stops hiding. Monday morning arrived with a kind of electric stillness, the kind that settles over a city right before a storm breaks. I barely slept the night before, but not from anxiety. My mind was too focused, too razor-sharp, moving through possible outcomes with a clarity that felt almost mechanical. By the time the sky turned pale blue, I was already showered, dressed, and seated at my desk with my laptop open, monitoring the cascading effects of a single email. At exactly 8 a.m., the first alert hit. System-wide alert. Liquidity withdrawal detected Tier 1 vendor. 1. This was the red alarm one triggered only when a major investor pulled out suddenly. Even before the internal chat logs updated, I knew what was happening inside her company's headquarters, phones ringing nonstop, department heads scrambling, analysts staring at numbers that no longer aligned. By 8:15, the panic deepened. New alerts flashed. Compliance rush request initiated. Due diligence reopened. Data audit ordered by external counsel. A win. But it was 8:30 a.m. when the real crack appeared in Linda's polished empire. A message popped up from the fund's internal feed. CTO flagged unauthorized data inquiry, possible external investigation identified. I knew what that meant. The CTO had finally seen the breadcrumb trail. Linda tried to bury the breach logs, the manipulations, the discrepancies. He would now be scrambling to understand why the company he believed he was helping build was suddenly under a microscope. Inside her glass office, Linda would be getting that call. I could imagine it. Her perfect posture stiffening, her voice tightening, her eyes darting across the room as she tried to maintain the aura of control she cherished more than truth. She would blame a glitch, an audit miscommunication, maybe even a disgruntled employee. But the CTO wasn't stupid. And investigative protocols weren't optional. By 9 a.m., the storm intensified. CFO suspended pending review. I stared at the notification without blinking. The CFO, Linda's closest ally, the one who had helped her shift numbers into nice, clean lines, was the first to fall. The fund's compliance team must have found enough irregularities in the financials to pull him instantly. That kind of suspension wasn't a warning. It was a signal. The company wasn't just unstable anymore. It was hemorrhaging. I refreshed the dashboard. More updates rolled in. At 9:40, another internal note appeared. Special Clause 9.2 under review. Anticipated activation within 20 minutes. My breath slowed, not from nerves, but from the quiet recognition that everything I had foreseen was unfolding in exact sequence. Linda had always believed that business was about personality. But right now, personality meant nothing. Only numbers did. Only signatures. Only contracts. Only consequences. Then, at exactly 10 a.m., the line appeared. The one that would break her. Clause 9.2 activated. CEO voting rights suspended for 48 hours. I sat back in my chair. No celebration. No satisfaction. Just inevitability. Linda had lost her power not by scandal or rumor or family drama, but by the architecture of the very system she claimed mastery over. For the first time in the company's existence, she wasn't in control. For the first time, she wasn't untouchable. For the first time, she had to face a world that couldn't be persuaded by charisma. At 10:12 a.m., my phone vibrated again. Board requesting background on breach timeline. Legal contacting external regulators. CTO requesting emergency meeting with fund. 12 minutes later, 10:24 a.m., the collapse became public. A trending news alert flashed across one of my screens. Breaking. FinLink Innovations faces internal turmoil. Sources report financial irregularities and data breach concerns. Someone leaked it. Maybe an employee. Maybe a board member. Maybe the suspended CFO himself. It didn't matter. Once the story touched the media, it spread at the speed of oxygen meeting fire. Phone calls started flooding every department. Investors demanded answers. Employees panicked. Competitors smelled blood. Reporters camped outside the main office doors. And somewhere in the middle of all of this was Linda staring at a hurricane she couldn't charm, silence, or manipulate into submission. At 10:30 a.m., another headline hit. CEO temporarily suspended pending investigation, sources suggest corporate governance trigger. Her worst nightmare, printed in bold black letters for the world to read. By 10:45, the internal messaging log exploded. Board scheduling emergency meeting at 11. ISEX, compliance recommending temporary restructuring. Capital partners requesting updated leadership roster. At this point, Linda would be making calls, frantic ones. To the board. To her CTO. To the CFO who could no longer answer. To her legal counsel. And probably, eventually, to me. But I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't open messages. I simply watched. Finally, at exactly 11 a.m., the board convened. Every major player. every senior executive, every legal representative, and me dialing in quietly, anonymously, one face among many on a virtual call, yet holding more power than any of them realized. The meeting began with tension sharp enough to cut through the speakers. The board chair summarized the situation bluntly. Too bluntly for Linda to cushion the fall. Financial irregularities. Undisclosed breach. Possible manipulation of audit logs. 50 million hidden liabilities. Executive misconduct. Investor withdrawal. Clause 9,2. Each accusation was another strike against the pedestal Linda had built for herself. I watched her face on the screen, her perfect makeup, her composed expression slowly cracking at the edges. Her voice wavered for the first time I had ever heard. She tried to defend herself. She tried to regain control. She tried to blame internal errors. She tried to say she was handling everything. But no one on that call wanted charm. They wanted accountability. They wanted truth. They wanted a leader who could stabilize a sinking ship. Linda was not that leader. At 11:52, the board chair delivered the blow. Effective immediately, executive authority is suspended pending full investigation. Linda's face drained of color. She whispered, barely audible, "My company is burning." And for the first time, she finally understood. It wasn't criticism. It wasn't sibling rivalry. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't family tension. It was reality catching up. The same reality she mocked me for understanding better than she ever could. At 12 p.m., the meeting ended. The board prepared for the next step. The fund prepared for control transition. The press prepared for the afternoon cycle. And Linda sat frozen, shocked, pale, silent. Her empire was on fire. And she didn't even know the most devastating truth yet. The person who lit the match was not her enemy. It was the sister she dismissed as not real business. Iru. By late afternoon, the news had already spread through the family like wildfire. Not the truth, never the truth, but a warped version of it, pieced together by whispers, assumptions, and the one-sided narrative Linda had fed them in desperation. My phone lit up with calls I ignored, messages I swiped away unread. But eventually, one text appeared from my mother. "Come home. Now, your sister is in crisis because of you." It was predictable. Almost choreographed. So I went. When I stepped into my parents' living room, it felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. A cluster of relatives had gathered, some seated stiffly on couches, others pacing, others whispering harshly as though preparing ammunition. My mother stood in the center, wringing her hands like a martyr. My father's face was red with indignation, and Linda, red-eyed, disheveled, stripped of her usual composure, sat hunched on the sofa, trembling with rage more than grief. The moment I walked in, the noise erupted. "How could you do this to your sister? She worked her whole life for that company. What kind of jealousy drives someone to sabotage family? You humiliated her on Christmas. Oh, do you even understand what you've caused?" Each accusation layered over the next, a wall of noise built from ignorance, panic, and blind loyalty. I stood still, letting them fling every word like stones. Not because I deserved them, but because watching them scramble to defend a collapsing fantasy told me everything about their priorities. Finally, my father stepped forward, voice booming with the authority he'd always used to silence me. "You will fix whatever you did," he snapped. "You will call that fund and tell them to reverse the decision. You will stop this nonsense before you destroy her career." I met his gaze without flinching. "There is no reversing what happened," I said calmly. The room froze for half a second, just long enough for Linda to explode. She shot to her feet, eyes wild, voice cracking with hysteria. "You," she screamed. "You did this. You destroyed everything I built." "I dis." Her steps were unsteady, but she stumbled closer, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You have no idea how business works. You're not a CEO. You're not a leader. You're nothing but—" Her voice broke. The whole room held its breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I didn't let her see the anger she wanted to provoke. Instead, I slipped a folder from my bag and placed it on the coffee table between us. A simple motion. Quiet, precise. "What's this?" my mother demanded. "The truth," I said. Linda scoffed. "Oh, please, more made-up accusations?" I opened the folder. Printed logs. Audit trails. Contract signatures with her name on them. Financial inconsistencias. Emails she thought she deleted. Data breach timelines. Evidence of falsified reports. The $20 million liability she hid. The shell company transactions she authorized. Every page documented. Stamped. Verified. Undeniable. "This," I said softly, "is what could put you in federal court." Anu. Silence hit the room like an earthquake, sudden, violent, disorienting. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's face drained of color. A few relatives leaned closer involuntarily, eyes wide with dawning horror. Linda stared at the papers as though they were written in a language she'd never seen. She shook her head slowly, lips parting soundlessly. No, this isn't, I didn't." But she recognized her own signatures. Her own writing. Her own timestamps. She read one page, then another, hands trembling more violently with each sheet she turned. By the time she reached the breach analysis, her legs gave out. She collapsed into the chair behind her, numb, gray, hollow. My mother whispered, "Linda, tell me this isn't real." Linda couldn't answer. The weight of the truth settled over the room like ash. Conversations died. Judgments wilted. The certainty everyone wielded like a weapon minutes ago evaporated into panic. My father finally found his voice, but it was no longer loud, just shaken. Why would you hide this?" Linda didn't answer him. She just stared at the papers, terrified of the reflection they offered her. I placed the final document on the table, an internal memo from the fund outlining probable executive misconduct and imminent governance transition. "That's what the board knows," I said. "That's what regulators will know next." Silence again. Longer this time. Deeper. My aunt whispered, horrified. This is criminal." Linda choked out a sound, half gasp, half denial. "I was fixing it. I just needed time. It wasn't supposed to." Her voice broke. She covered her face, shoulders shaking. Watching her fall apart didn't bring me satisfaction. It didn't heal anything. It didn't rewind the years of belittlement or the humiliation she threw at me. All I felt was inevitability. She built a kingdom on lies. I just stopped holding the walls up for her. My father turned to me, voice a mix of rage and desperation. "Why didn't you come to us? Why didn't you try to help her quietly?" I met his stare evenly. "I did." Then I added, "She didn't listen." My mother shook her head in denial, as though the truth hurt more than the scandal itself. "No, this can't be. Linda would never risk something like this." I looked down at the mountain of evidence between us. She already did. Endos. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, unable to choose sides now that the illusion had shattered. But as heavy as the moment was, it wasn't the climax. Not even close. Because while the room reeled from what I'd revealed, none of them knew the most devastating truth of all, the one that would shatter not just Linda's pride, but the entire foundation of power she believed she held. I watched their faces, fear, confusion, guilt, disbelief, letting the silence thicken just a little more. Then I said gently, almost kindly, "This is only the beginning." And for the first time all night, Linda looked up, eyes wide, terrified because she could tell from my tone that I was still holding something back. Something bigger. Something she couldn't imagine. Something that would change everything again. For a long moment, the room remained frozen. No one spoke. No one blinked. The folder sat open on the coffee table like an exposed wound, the harsh truth spilling out of its pages. Linda kept staring at it as if sheer willpower could rewrite the words. My parents hovered behind her like two pillars beginning to crack. And every relative in the room watched me with a mix of fear, shock, and dawning recognition. They knew the story wasn't over. They could feel it in the way I stood, not defensive, not triumphant, but steady. Unshaken. Certain. I exhaled slowly. "There's one more thing," I said quietly. The silence tightened, drawing the air thinner. My father swallowed hard. "What? What do you mean, one more thing?" Linda's head snapped up, eyes swollen, voice trembling with panic disguised as anger. "Haven't you done enough?" she spat. "What else could you possibly say?" I sat down across from her, not to intensify the tension, but because the next truth needed no theatrics. It required clarity, precision, calm. When Clause 9.2 activated, I began, "Your board had to appoint a temporary controlling holder." My father frowned. "A what?" My mother whispered. "Is that like an interim CEO?" "More," I said. "A controlling holder has full executive authority for the duration of the suspension, complete decision-making power. They oversee restructuring, compliance, financial review, leadership changes. Everything." Linda scoffed, her voice shrill. "Then the fund will take control. They always do. They'll put in one of their senior partners or advisors. They won't trust a stranger. They certainly won't trust." I cut her off softly. "They didn't appoint an advisor." She stared at me. "They appointed me." The explosion wasn't loud. It was quiet, horrifyingly quiet. The kind of silence that drops after a car crash or a sudden death. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. My father blinked as though trying to force the world back into focus. Someone in the corner whispered, "She's lying," but even their voice wavered. Linda almost laughed almost. But the sound died in her throat. You're not even a board member. You're not an investor. You're nobody to that company. Why would they choose you?" "Because," I said gently, "I'm not nobody to the fund, and I'm not nobody to your company." Her eyes widened. The denial in her expression twisted into dread. No, you're not saying." "The fund didn't just choose me because of my technical background," I continued. "Or because I understand the cybersecurity risks better than anyone on your team. They chose me because I hold enough of the company to qualify. 48 hours is a small window. They needed someone with a significant stake, someone with internal access, someone trustworthy." My father blinked rapidly, shaking his head. "A significant stake? But you don't own any shares." I held his gaze. "Don't I?" Linda pushed herself up from the sofa, her hair falling messily around her face, her voice a cracked whisper. "You're lying. The fund owns my company." "Not you, the fund." "The fund," I corrected quietly, "isn't as independent as you think." I reached into my bag again and placed a second folder on the table. This one thinner, but heavier in meaning. I opened it, revealing documents marked with the fund's seal, shareholder breakdowns, and one simple fact printed in cold black ink. "The investment firm," I said, "is 70% owned by a holding company." My father frowned. My mother looked confused. Several relatives tilted their heads as if waiting for the punchline. Linda whispered, "What holding company?" I lifted my eyes to hers. "Mine." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Linda staggered back a step. No, that's impossible. That fund, my fund, is one of the biggest in the region. You didn't." But she knew from my tone, my composure, the documents in front of her. I wasn't bluffing. "You asked earlier why the fund would nominate me," I continued. "Why they'd trust me. Why they'd give me authority over your company." I leaned forward slightly, my voice still soft, still even. "They didn't just trust me, Linda, they answer to me." My father's voice cracked. You own it?" My mother choked out, "When? How? How could we not know?" "Because you never asked," I wanted to say. "Because you never believed I was capable of something real. Because you never looked past Linda long enough to see the world I built in the shadows." But instead, I said, I created the holding company years ago. Quietly, legally, strategically. I used the revenue from my cybersecurity licenses, reinvested, grew it, acquired assets, and eventually bought into the fund. Over time, my ownership increased, and as of last year, 70% is mine. Linda's face drained of all color. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the sofa as though gravity itself doubled in weight. You, she whispered. You built a fund? You control a fund? All this time. I nodded once. Yes. She shook her head violently, her breath heaving. No, no, no. You said you were building some online project. You don't run real businesses. You don't. Chị bảo công việc của em không phải business thật. I said quietly, switching back to Vietnamese with calm deliberation. Nhưng business thật, bây giờ thuộc về em. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Around us, the room remained suffocatingly still. My parents, for the first time in my life, looked at me not with disappointment, but with fear, and awe, and something like regret. The kind that arrives too late. Linda finally found her voice, small and broken. The fund, the one that invested in me, that built my company. I nodded. Em lập ra nó? Her tears fell silently. Because, in that moment, she understood the full shape of the truth. I wasn't the invisible sister. I wasn't the quiet failure. I wasn't the hobbyist she mocked. I was the architect, the financier, the silent owner, and, as of this morning, also, the controlling holder of the very company she believed she was born to lead. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because there was still one final truth she needed to face. The one she couldn't escape. The one she couldn't bury. The one she couldn't twist with words. The truth that power, real power, had never belonged to her. It had belonged to me all along. The days that followed unfolded with a clarity that felt almost surreal, like watching a storm move past after it's already torn through everything in its path. Linda was officially suspended within 24 hours. Not quietly, not internally, her removal was documented, filed, time-stamped, and circulated through every leadership channel in the company. She was required to enroll in a mandatory executive oversight program, essentially a corporate version of probation, complete with weekly evaluations, ethics, interviews, and psychological assessments. For someone who had built her entire identity around being flawless, the humiliation stung deeper than any punishment. Meanwhile, the fund's nomination became official. I stepped in as interim executive director, a title that appeared next to my name on internal dashboards, organizational charts, and board memos, many of which Linda had once signed herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. My first day walking through the company's headquarters was nothing like Linda's dramatic entrances. No cameras, no applause, no entourage. Just me, a black laptop bag, and a quiet conviction that had grown sharper with every step on the concrete floor. Employees looked up as I passed, curious, cautious, whispering among themselves. Some recognized me vaguely from family stories Linda had told, but the expressions on their faces carried something else too. Relief. They were exhausted from months of instability, lies, shifting directives, and the constant fear that everything might collapse. I wasn't glamorous, but I was steady. I wasn't charismatic, but I was competent. And for the first time in months, they sensed that someone was finally putting out the fire instead of pretending it wasn't there. My first act was simple. Fix the breach. I opened every log, traced every vulnerability, and worked with the security team until the system's integrity was restored. No theatrics, no big speeches, just quiet work. The kind that gets things done. Next, I restructured the financial department, replacing Linda's hand-picked allies with people who understood accountability. I reopened honest audits, stabilized the bleeding accounts, corrected projections, and met with every senior leader face-to-face to rebuild the trust Linda had torched in silence. Within weeks, the chaos settled. The stock stabilized. The fund regained confidence. Employees started breathing again. And through it all, I kept my distance from the noise, working, correcting, rebuilding, quietly steering the company back from a cliff Linda had never even acknowledged. My family, however, was not as easy to stabilize. The first time they saw me after everything unfolded, they looked at me like I was someone they had never met. My father's voice, once booming with judgment, softened around the edges. My mother hovered like she was afraid I might disappear if she blinked. Relatives who had mocked me during Christmas now approached cautiously, offering apologies disguised as compliments. "I never realized how talented you were. You were always the quiet one, but clearly not the weak one. We underestimated you." They were right. They had. But I didn't offer them comfort. Not bitterness, either, just boundaries. I visited when necessary, spoke politely, kept interactions brief, and refused to slip back into the role they had cast me in for decades. The overlooked child, the quiet shadow trailing behind the family's golden star. That version of me had burned away the night Linda tried to humiliate me in front of 60 relatives. What remained was someone sharper, stronger, and unwilling to bend for anyone's comfort. Linda and I didn't speak much during that period. Sometimes she sent short, clipped emails about company matters. Sometimes she avoided eye contact in mandatory review meetings. I didn't humiliate her, I didn't punish her, I simply let the consequences stand. Some lessons aren't taught, they are lived. Months passed. The company recovered stronger, cleaner, more stable than before. The board requested that I stay permanently in a senior strategic position. I declined. I never wanted Linda's spotlight. I wanted integrity. Structure. Something real. When my interim term ended, I stepped back into my world of AI systems, cybersecurity architecture, and quiet decision-making, still powerful, still influential, but on my own terms. The fund continued with its structure unchanged, quietly answering to the holding company at the top, the one Linda still pretended didn't exist. One evening, long after the company had stabilized, long after the family had adjusted to seeing me through new eyes, I stood outside my apartment balcony watching the city lights shimmer like distant constellations. The air was cool, gentle, almost forgiving. That's when I thought of the one line I wished someone had understood years earlier, before the insults, before the comparisons, before the endless underestimation. A truth that defined everything I had become. I whispered it softly into the night, not as a message to Linda, or my parents, or the board, but to the version of myself who once believed that staying quiet meant being small. My silence was never weakness. My silence was when I was preparing to change everything. And I had.